Hello, my name is Mark Borthwick. I am a salmon farm researcher. I was also previously the head of research at the Aquatic Life Institute. I've just come across some footage by Animal Equality, and I want to shed some light on the things that we see there. So here we see salmon being brought up, scooped up by the net so they can be sucked onto the boat for processing. This is extremely likely to cause fin damage and scale damage and distress for the fish, who will be pushed up against each other for long periods of time. Salmonids, including salmon and trout, are solitary predators, and they will aggress or cannibalize each other if they're brought into close contact with one another. So they're clearly crowded, and this process can take days, which will be very bad for the welfare of the fish. This is one of those situations in which the law is probably behind the evidence, because what they're doing here is industry standard, but it's obviously not appropriate from a welfare point of view. Like, you couldn't imagine scooping up cows or chickens in a net like this. So on these boats, there's a series of tubes which suck the fish up and then deposit them into a swimming pool to go into the slaughter machine, the stun kill machine. But fish are coming out of these tubes already bloody and motionless. And you can see that they're being pushed out of that tube quite fast into a vertical wall, which is likely to cause blunt trauma to the fish. This is concerning, and the amount of blood you see in the swim pool is concerning, because these fish have yet to go into the stunning machine, which is in that box in the middle. So you'd want to see fish emerging healthily out of the tubes so they can swim into that machine. The amount of blood and the number of motionless fish that are present in the swim pool means that these machines are probably poorly adjusted and causing blunt trauma and unstunned death for these fishes. One of the issues around fish slaughter is that it's very hard to visually identify when the fish are correctly stunned, and very hard to visually identify when the fish are losing consciousness. So some studies that use electric imaging of salmon brains have shown that they remain conscious for way longer than cows remain conscious after you stun them and cut them, because of the different brain physiology. So just because a fish has a loss of motion, it doesn't mean that it's dead, and it doesn't mean that it's unconscious. So it's very important that these machines are run consistently, because even at maximum consistency, there's still a risk that these animals are being correctly stunned. The main problem here is that the machine appears to be being run way too fast. There's so many more fish in the swim pool than the swim pool can accommodate. Some of those fish are already coming out immobile and are being pushed into that machine belly up or tail first. This means that the machine might stun the tail or cut the belly or electrocute the fish from the tail upwards, none of which are good for welfare. And in a system where correct stunning is not guaranteed and very hard to verify, incorrect application of the stunning machine compounds those risks, and it means that the risk of many fish being incorrectly stunned and there being a lot of suffering in the system is amplified. So all these machines are carefully calibrated to the size of one fish, especially if they're using a pneumatic club or blades. If a fish of a different size comes in, the chances of them getting correctly stunned is much lower. However, we naturally have a variety of sizes of fish, and as with any machine, there might be some slight variation in the skull thickness or the orientation of the animal, and the animal will not be correctly stunned and slaughtered. So by law, there has to be a secondary stunning tool, which unfortunately is usually just a club, which is a very low-tech solution. Again, you can't imagine clubbing a chicken or a cow to death in a slaughterhouse environment. So the swim pool is so called because salmon and trout only swim forwards. So the pool applies a contraflow down into the pool. So the salmon swim up the flow into the machine, which makes sure they go into the machine head first. Any stunning technique, including pistons, which club and then cut, and electro stunning, are applied to the head first because that's the center of operations. If fish go in backwards, then their tails will be clubbed and cut, or electrodes will be applied from the tail up to the head, which will be painful, which will result in misstunning. In this footage, we can clearly see that at least some fish are being left to asphyxiate, which means to die from lack of oxygen. Some of those fish have already been through the slaughter machine and are doing so in the bucket with all the slaughtered fish. It's impossible to verify from movement alone whether a fish has been correctly stunned. Some of those fish will still be conscious because their brain still has enough oxygen in the blood. Some of those fish may have had a broken spine due to the stunning and are just immobile but still fully conscious. We also see fish that have been diverted from the main slaughter machine because they're too small. Some of these are being left in a bucket out of water to asphyxiate, which isn't correct. Fish that have been diverted from the main slaughter process have to be euthanized as soon as possible, and there's clearly nobody monitoring that machine. Particularly concerning in this footage are several instances of workers throwing fish. In one case, a worker throws a clearly living small fish, which has been swept up into the machine by mistake, off the boat from the center of the deck, and it hits a ladder rail and falls onto the ground. The worker does see this and pick it up and throw it over the side again, but it's obviously received blunt trauma for being thrown at such speed against a rail. You shouldn't be throwing animals in a facility like this. Even more concerning, if you look closely at the footage, you can see that workers are throwing fish at each other and playing a game where these fish are being thrown so fast they bounce off the walls. One of them seems to fall back into the machine a second time, where it might receive subsequent electric shocks or subsequent cuts. I think this footage shows why oversight on these facilities is so important. It's so hard to get a good impression of what happens in these facilities which are hidden out at sea. And even though this happens on boats, oversight and animal welfare on these facilities is just as important and is just as much in the public interest as it is on any terrestrial facility. I think this makes a pretty good case for stronger legal protections on wellboats, considering that Animal Equality has captured 25 minutes of footage and found this many areas of concern.